up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon. Chinese President Xi Jinping starts his two-day visit to Seoul today. He'll hold summit talks with President Park Geun-hye later this afternoon. And during President Xi's visit, Seoul and Beijing are expected to agree to open a 1 yuan currency trading market, making Korea the world's fifth country to trade directly in yuan. Plus, there are mounting concerns the ever-strengthening Korean won will severely impact the profitability of the nation's already struggling small and mid-sized firms. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Thursday, July 3rd here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story at this lunchtime, Chinese President Xi Jinping starts a two-day state visit to South Korea on this Thursday. President Park Geun-hye is scheduled to hold summit talks with him later this afternoon. Topping the agenda will be efforts to curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions and Japan's shift to the right under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Economic cooperation will also be a major topic of discussion, with the two sides seeking speedy talks on a bilateral free trade agreement. Choi You-sun has the details.
The South Korean presidential office is emphasizing that President Park Geun-hye and Chinese President Xi Jinping's special friendship was a key factor behind Xi's state visit to Seoul. It's the first time a Chinese leader is coming to South Korea before paying a visit to Beijing's traditional ally North Korea and neighboring Japan. Presidents Park and Xi, who first met in 2005, have made strong impressions on each other, and since taking office last year, they have met 4 times. President Xi's decision to visit Seoul first will put more pressure on Pyongyang to lay down its nuclear weapons and return to negotiations. Now the question is exactly how the two leaders will deliver their positions in a joint statement following Thursday's summit.
While South Korea wants a concrete expression opposing North Korea's 4th nuclear test, China wants to keep the general term of denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
Also topping the agenda for the talks will be Tokyo's retreat from a historical apology to Seoul and its attempts to expand its military presence. Beijing, locked in a bitter territorial dispute with Tokyo, is expected to seek greater cooperation with Seoul on historical issues, but it's unlikely Presidents Park and Xi will specifically target Japan. The amicable relations between Seoul and Beijing and their mutual mistrust of Tokyo is not a welcoming dynamic for Washington, which is looking to expand its influence in Asia.
China has been pressuring Korea not to take part in the U.S.-led anti-ballistic missile defense system. The U.S., on the other hand, has been urging Korea to take caution in participating in the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
On the economic front, the leaders of Korea and China will agree to speed up their FTA negotiations and set up a trade market for their respective currencies. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
The United States is keeping a close eye on the outcome of the Seoul-Beijing summit. Washington says it encourages countries in Northeast Asia to engage in dialogue, but U.S. officials declined to comment on whether they were concerned that South Korea and China were getting too close. At a regular press briefing Wednesday, the State Department spokesperson said both countries are important key partners to the U.S. and that Washington will wait to hear what the two leaders say at the conclusion of their meeting. Let's take a listen.
We also encourage dialogue between countries in the region, and we've long encouraged the strong and peaceful rise and prosperity of China. So we'll see what comes out of the dialogue tomorrow, and certainly, we'll encourage meetings moving forward.
And the media spotlight is not just on President Xi, but also his wife, who is accompanying him on his trip to Seoul. She's almost as well known as her husband, and her fashion style in particular has made headlines around the world. Our Song Ji-sun has more on China's First Lady.
She is the Michelle Obama of the world's second largest economy and has been referred to as the Carla Bruni of China for her past career in entertainment. It's Chinese First Lady Peng Liyuan, whose reputation within China is as large as that of her politician husband, Chinese President Xi Jinping. Unlike her predecessors, the former singer and performer has been outgoing and active in her role as China's First Lady. The world's 57th most powerful woman, according to Forbes magazine, is also a goodwill ambassador for the World Health Organization. Selected to the International Best Dressed by Vanity Fair magazine last year, everything Peng wears makes headlines in fashion magazines and immediately sells out. Peng is scheduled to visit palaces in the Korean capital and attend cultural events during her 2-day visit, and will be on her own for most of her itinerary while her husband holds talks. To show around the city, the presidential office of Cheongwade has tapped current senior secretary for political affairs Choi You-sun, who will serve as Peng's personal tour guide during her stay. 송지선, Arirang News.
President Xi offered his thoughts on the upcoming summit in a piece that appeared in Korea's major daily newspapers on this Thursday. The written contribution, which encourages greater cooperation between Seoul and Beijing and expresses high hopes for the summit, echoes the sentiments voiced by President Park a day earlier during her interview with Chinese broadcaster CCTV. Yoo Di-an reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping begins his piece with a traditional Korean saying, "It only costs 3 straw bags to buy a house, but 1,000 to get a good neighbor," emphasizing the importance of having good neighbors. He goes on to say that Seoul and Beijing have been able to build a healthy relationship based on trust, adding the two should always be able to freely exchange opinions on areas of mutual interest. President Xi also calls economic cooperation the main focal point of Korea-China relations and says China is aiming to expand its economic ties with Seoul through speedy negotiations on their bilateral FTA. As for his visit to Seoul, he writes that he hopes the two leaders will share friendship, discuss cooperation, and preserve peace. His words were echoed a day earlier by Korean President Park Geun-hye during an interview with China's CCTV, where she expressed hope that the visit will bring relations between the two to a new high.
이번에 시 주석님의 방한도 더욱 그 내실화 있는 결실을 많이 거둬서 두 나라 관계의 신뢰와 또 우호 관계가 더욱 깊어지리라 그렇게 생각합니다.
When asked about Korea's ongoing historical dispute with Japan, President Park simply said Tokyo needs to have a correct understanding of history. She also accused Tokyo of trying to undermine the 1993 Kono Statement, which was its official apology for forcing roughly 200,000 women into sexual slavery during World War II.
국가 간의 신뢰를 저버리는 일이고 또 국제사회의 그 준엄한 그런 그 어떤 목소리를 무시하는 그런 행위라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 일본은 이제라도 어떻게 역사의 수레바퀴를 되돌릴 수는 도저히 없는 것이기 때문에
Japan's recent attempts to revise history and economic cooperation between China and Korea will top the agenda of the summit between the two leaders. Yoo Di-an, Arirang News.
Now, on the sidelines of their summit in Seoul later on this Thursday, Korea and China are expected to ink a deal to allow direct trading of their local currencies. This agreement will slash transaction costs for companies on either side of the West Sea and reduce foreign exchange risks. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korea and China have been trying to settle their exports and imports in their own currencies in light of their growing trade. China is Korea's largest trading partner, while Korea is China's third largest trading partner. Last year, the trade volume between the two countries totaled $230 billion, with Korea posting a $63 billion surplus. Up until now, only 1% of Korean companies settle their trading bills with their Chinese partners directly in the Chinese yuan, because only those already holding enough yuan could do so. Under the currency deal, exporters and importers from the two countries will no longer have to pay transaction fees when converting the won to the yuan, and vice versa, since there's no need to convert into the US dollar. The new arrangement is expected to cut Korean traders' business costs by at least 3 to 5%. It would also help reduce potential exchange rate risk. A researcher at the Korea Capital Market Institute says the deal will
make Korea's financial market more attractive to foreign investors as well.
The deal with China is expected to enhance Korea's financial and industrial brand image with the growing use of the yuan in international trade.
The global trade volume settled in the yuan amounted to 4.6 trillion yuan, or $741 billion last year, up 58% from a year earlier. In addition to the currency deal, China is reportedly considering allowing Korean financial institutions to invest directly in China's capital markets by granting them investment quotas of up to $13 billion. China has similar quota deals with Britain, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, without naming North Korea by name, China called for more efforts to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula on Wednesday. This after Pyongyang fired 2 projectiles into the East Sea. Since the firings came a day before Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul on this Thursday, there's speculation Pyongyang is expressing its deep displeasure over his visit to the south, especially with the absence of such a visit to North Korea. However, China's foreign ministry downplayed such a possibility on Wednesday, saying Beijing sees no connection between President Xi's visit and the firings. Beijing also dismissed similar claims earlier this week after the North fired 2 Scud-type missiles into the East Sea on Sunday. Japan will relax some of its sanctions on North Korea while the regime begins its re-investigation into the abductions of Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe told reporters Thursday that North Korea's special committee is fully authorized to launch an effective probe into any organization. The sanctions will be lifted, reportedly include travel curbs and restrictions on money transfers and a ban on port calls by North Korean ships. Now, these sanctions are separate from those imposed by Japan and the international community following North Korea's nuclear tests. A North Korean citizen has reportedly defected to a South Korean border island on this Thursday. A military source said an unarmed North Korean man, presumed to be a civilian, expressed his desire to defect to the south after arriving on a wooden boat on Beingryongdo Island earlier this Thursday morning. The source said the man is currently under investigation by related authorities. An official at Seoul's Unification Ministry said he could be a fisherman, considering that he arrived on Beingryongdo Island.
And moving on to some economic news, Korean businessmen's current woes are now down to the local currency that many expect will breach the psychologically important 1,001 level against the greenback in the latter half of the year. The domestic economy, already suffering from sluggish domestic demand, is expected to take a major hit from this trend. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Exports are Korea's traditional growth engine, taking up more than half of the nation's gross domestic product. That's one reason why the nation's financial authorities have become increasingly sensitive to the growing strength of the local currency. And it wasn't an exception on Wednesday when the Korean won hit its highest level against the U.S. dollar in nearly 6 years. They're concerned that the strengthening won will erode the profitability of local exporters, especially those of small and medium-sized companies that remain vulnerable to currency fluctuations. Experts say while large companies manage to minimize the negative impact of a strong local currency by diversifying settlement currencies and raising overseas production, local small and medium-sized enterprises don't have the money to do all that. The Korea Federation of SMEs says that more than 90% of 94 surveyed small and medium-sized exporters saw their profitability drop in May due to the strong won. What's worse is that the currency woes come at a time when domestic demand remains sluggish. While Korea's economic recovery remains a gradual, export-led process, experts say a strong local currency that erodes the price competitiveness of local exporters is likely to dent the overall pace of economic recovery. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, following the April ferry disaster that left some 300 people dead and missing, the Park Geun-hye administration drew up plans to reorganize the government with a focus on safety issues. Her plans are now facing opposition, but which side will prevail? Ji Myung-gil reports.
President Park Geun-hye has vowed to disband the Korea Coast Guard over its poor handling of rescue operations as the Seoul ferry sank. In its place, the president wants to create a new government body charged with safety and rescue affairs under the office of the Prime Minister, which would serve as the control tower in future disaster situations. Under the plan, the Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency will be absorbed into a new government agency on national safety. But the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has already registered its objections to the plan. Instead, it has proposed keeping the Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency intact and establishing a full-fledged safety-related ministry. It also suggested the National Security Council under the presidential office become the control tower of all disaster and safety-related issues instead of the Prime Minister's office. Under the NPAD plan, the Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency would still be responsible for safety issues, including rescue work at sea and on land. The party is also calling for a removal of the Coast Guard's authority over investigations and intelligence gathering on land. However, the ruling Saenuri party is unlikely to give in to the NPAD's demands. It says the opposition's opinions will be heard, but that more weight must be given to the government's plan. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, this shouldn't come as a big surprise, but it's an interesting indication of the sentiment in Korea following April's ferry disaster. The number of people taking trips by ship tumbled 26% in May from a year earlier. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries says that's a drop from nearly 2 million to 1.5 million passengers. In particular, the number of ferry passengers to Korea's southernmost Jeju Island plunged 47%. The ill-fated Seoul ferry was en route to the resort island when it sank off Korea's southwestern coast. The ministry attributes the overall drop to public fear of ferry travel after the tragedy, but also to the Seoul's operator, Cheonghaejin Marine Company, being suspended from operating the Incheon-Jeju route. And time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this Thursday. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
Yeah, Eunice, we start in Israel. Another teenager has been killed and his body was found in Jerusalem. This time, though, it belongs to a Palestinian teenager and it's raising suspicions of a reprisal attack.
That's right, Mark. The timing of this is telling. The attack came just one day after Israelis had buried their 3 teenagers believed to have been kidnapped and killed by members of Hamas. The latest victim in the arrest was 17-year-old Mohammed Abu Khadr, last seen being forced into a car in the West Bank early Wednesday. His body was discovered later that day in a Jerusalem forest. His death has touched off violence in East Jerusalem and the West Bank as angry Palestinians threw rocks at Israeli forces. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the death of the Palestinian teen as despicable murder and promised a thorough and swift investigation. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called on Israel to issue the strongest punishment against the Israeli settlers he said were behind the killing. In Iraq, strong evidence suggests Iran has sent fighter jets to help its neighbors stave off the fiery Sunni insurgency. This according to analysts at London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies, who say that a July 1st delivery of fighter jets originated from Tehran, based on an imagery analysis of the markings, serial numbers, and camouflage of the Sukhoi Frogfoot ground attack jets. If true, this would also mean longtime enemies Iran and the U.S. are now working side by side in the conflict. U.S. drones and helicopters have been actively gathering intelligence on the Sunni insurgency led by the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. Disgraced former French President Nicolas Sarkozy said he was profoundly shocked after being put under formal investigation for alleged influence peddling. In an interview with French TV, Sarkozy denied breaking the law, insisting that the French justice system was being used for political ends to give him a reputation that is not true. On Tuesday, he became the first French president to be put under police detention, questioned on whether he had asked a sitting judge to disclose insider information on a 2007 probe on his campaign funds. And finally, Muslims in China's northern Xinjiang province are being directed to abstain from fasting and other religious activities during the month of Ramadan. The ban applies to party members, teachers, and students. It was announced via guidelines posted on websites explaining the restriction was meant to protect students from religious promotion. State-run newspapers have also run editorials warning of health dangers of fasting. The ban comes as a security crackdown is in place in Xinjiang following deadly terror attacks that Beijing has blamed on the ethnically Turkic Uyghur minority. It is not the first time such a ban has been enacted.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11. Now it appears Korea's head coach Hong Myung-bo will stay in his job despite a disappointing Brazil World Cup, which saw the team have its worst result in 16 years with only one draw and 2 losses. In a press conference Thursday, the Korea Football Association said it was not fair to heap all the blame onto Hong for not achieving their widely stated goal of advancing to the knockout stages. Hong will likely remain in the role until his contract expires after next year's Asian Cup. Appointed to lead the national team less than 1 year before the World Cup, Hong came under fire for selecting players he's worked with closely in the past, despite their poor form or lack of match time at their clubs. The former defender, who helped Korea place 4th at the 2002 World Cup, took charge of the younger squad in the late 2000s, leading them to the bronze medal at the 2012 London Olympics. Now, a theatrical performance dealing with the horrors faced by the Korean victims of Japan's system of wartime sex slavery has opened here in Korea. The drama's Japanese creator says the Japanese government cannot have a clear conscience accusing the victims of being liars when there's so much evidence to prove otherwise. Park Geun-hye reports.
In this monologue play, former wartime sex slave Young Ja recounts her life story. When she was young, Korea was under the Japanese colonial rule, and she was sent to Japan thinking she was going to work in a factory. Upon her arrival, however, she was forced into sexual slavery. She was just 14 years old. The play's creator says the piece is titled Liar Young Ja, as it accuses the Japanese government of making former sex slaves liars.
Through the play, I aim to criticize the Abe administration. As you can see on this stage backdrop, I posted the face of Prime Minister Abe to criticize the administration's recent moves.
80-year-old veteran Japanese playwright Fujita Asaya says he wanted to tell the truth with a play that's written based on facts and research, as he couldn't bear to watch the Japanese government conceal the obvious truth. Despite threats from far-right extremists in Japan, the play was performed in 1995. But Asaya is furious that nothing much changed in almost 2 decades.
It's basically the same as 20 years ago. In fact, the situation in Japan has gotten worse. I'm so angry. I want the Korean people to know that there are many more angry Japanese people like myself.
The monodrama will be staged in major cities in Korea this year and will be put on stage in China later this year. ISRAELI plans to take the show to other countries as well, including the Philippines and Japan, and some European countries in the years to come. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It's been raining on and off since last night here in Seoul, and as we can see on our radar map, some of the regions are still receiving rainfall at the moment, but compared to earlier hours, heavy rain clouds have moved out from the peninsula, so the rainfall shouldn't be as heavy as it was yesterday, but still it could be heavy at times. But all the rain should let up late tonight, and if you have noticed, the rainy season arrived in the central region 10 days later than normal. So today will be a rainy and gloomy day, but at least we'll get a relief from the heat. Top temperatures will only be rising to mid-20s, just above the 25 degrees Celsius. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Behind the capital, Daegu and Gwangju will rise to 26, while Busan should make it to 25. Now for other regions, down on Jeju and Daejeon should see a high of 26 as well, and Dokdo will reach 22. Well, that's all from me today, and back to you guys.
Thank you, Jim, for that. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Jinju and I will be back at the same time on Friday. Until then, goodbye.